Welcome to episode 6 of Gold Digging, a weekly show where I try to unearth some golden nuggets from LinkedIn's leading marketing experts. It's short form, so it'll be under 15 minutes. Promises to be challenging, topical, hopefully ask some of the tough questions. Very, very lucky this week. We have the Queen of Insight, Isabel Lydall, 15 years of experience in both marketing and insight on a client side. She's worked on some of my favorite brands ever, Jammy Dodgers, Cadbury Fingers, Cow and Gate. She now runs a market research and brand strategy mini agency called Curiosity and Clarity, which does focus primarily on FMCG, but Isabel's amazing, so she can turn her hands at anything. So, Isabel, welcome. What has got your goat?
Well, thank you very much for having me. That's a brilliant intro. Thank you. I'll tell you what's got my goat, and I'm seeing more of it at the moment, and I guess it's kind of understandable, but selfish marketing is getting my goat, or possibly selfish business. But I think selfish marketing is at the core of it.
I love, already as a topic, I love it, but what do we mean by selfish marketing?
Well, it's businesses who are purely looking for what they can get. So how much money can I make? How much money can I give back to my shareholders? Clearly, everybody's got to survive, but it's when businesses lose sight of the end point, which is creating things that people are going to buy and they're going to love and that are going to engage their consumers. And I think, I'm seeing more of it around at the moment, and it's really understandable because I've been client side, I've managed brands. Once you see your P&L move into slightly scary territory, it's really tempting to pull back on all the stuff that you might think is a bit of a nice to have, but is actually really not a nice to have.
Well, Jill, because I've been banging my drum pretty hard at the moment, saying to people that at a time of recession or cost of living crisis, you've got to compete with own label, not on shrinkflation, not on price, not on taking stuff away, but on actually adding value. And I don't, for some reason, I just don't think that brands get that if people are going to pay more for it, they want more, right?
Yeah, and at the moment, customers are, if anything, even more demanding of that. If you've got less money, if your budget for your weekly shop is going less far, you want every penny of that to count. So the minute you start being less good value, you're totally vulnerable to own label coming in. And I think it's a really interesting one. I've got loads of examples from all kinds of industries, but I think
give me some.
Oh, go on then. Well, seeing as we started talking about FMCG, I think, I don't know how much time you spend on Twitter at the moment, but there is a fairly gigantic explosion going on there. And I guess my read on it is that, and I may be wrong, I'm clearly not best mates with Elon Musk, but I think he's probably got a little bit of, post-purchase dissonance. He may be a billionaire, but if you just spent 44 billion on something, you're going to be a little bit like, oh my God, what have I done? And I think maybe that's what's behind a lot of the stuff he's doing, is this idea of kind of selfish marketing. He's going, oh my God, I've got to claw back some of this. How am I going to do it? And he's forgotten that actually the people who use Twitter are the people who make it what it is. And as soon as you start pissing people off, and it's not a platform that is, perfect by any means. And I think that's almost their danger, in that you almost reach this tipping point where Twitter over the last few years has been great for a lot of things, but so much misinformation. It's a toxic, bin fire of a place. Actually, what he's done is always taken a lot of people to that tipping point where they're going, that balance is now out of whack.
And is there such a thing as, I always wonder with sort of, whenever I see data sets and data analysis, that marketers forget to recognize that they're people, but they also forget to recognize that there is such a thing as people power. So do you think that actually, if you create the right movement, brands can actually lose a lot of value, a lot of market share just from taking customers for granted?
Absolutely, yeah. And I think, it goes back to that thing of people are more demanding at the moment of what they do with their money. But also, in a lot of ways, they are quite patient. You can push your luck quite a lot with customers, especially in FMCG. If people are buying you once, twice a year, are they going to notice a reformulation? Maybe not immediately, but if you pile thing on top of thing on top of thing, eventually you reach, what I call this tipping point, where there's so much then wrong that people go, this is not worth it, I'm not having this anymore.
And where does that sit? So recently we saw that Galaxy's reformulated and cocoa butter's not the second biggest ingredient. I posted about P&G putting all of their products into standardized packaging. Obviously, the Law one, where suddenly they took their distinctive assets and they kind of created some economies of scale by using the same production line as Dow Egberts. The consumers care about that? Because even on the Law, I noticed that when they did that, they took some pack weight out. So now they, you get 15 grams less, but the price hasn't changed. When does it become, to your point, selfish versus sort of a necessity?
Survival. Yeah. And I mean, let's face it, we want brands to survive. We need to get through this, otherwise there isn't going to be, you've got to balance it. I think it becomes almost, I think there are two different things we're talking about here. One, there is where brands mess with their distinctive assets, and I think that is an immediate, because that's not even thinking about a relationship with the consumer. That's just people are not going to see you in store anymore. I think the one with product reformulation is really interesting, and I'll talk about. There is a biscuit brand I've worked on that I won't name, but they started to have a persistent problem with customer complaints and people coming in and saying, these taste stale, these aren't right anymore, there's all kinds of issues with them. And it was becoming a real issue. And the team was looking back at it saying, well, we have been changing the recipe, but every time we sensory test it, there is no significant difference between the new version and the old version. But they've done it about 5 times. So it's like, right, go and pull out the recipe from 2005, make that one, and then compare it to what you've got now. And it was just that incremental chipping away over time that I think you really have to watch. And I think that's where you do lose people. I think you can get away with 1 or 2 that are maybe incrementally less good quality. But equally, when times are good, put it on your to-do list to put that back in.
And also, I remember
niggle about, that's got to come back in time, when you can.
And I remember sort of a story about the same thing when I sort of asked someone about sort of, obviously a lot of these brands manufacture own label as well. And I remember saying to someone, is there any different in recipe? And they're like, well, actually it's more efficient for us to run the same recipe as opposed to cleaning down the line. So do you think that's the problem with reformulation, that actually it's always about stripping out, and therefore you're going to be closer to the own label version of it, because own label is clearly what's the minimum we can do for it to be a viable product. But brands then surely have to, I know cost of goods is a problem, but you have to keep that specialness in there, don't you?
Yeah, I don't think it's always fair that own label is less. I think sometimes it's different and it's a different proposition and it's got a different recipe. It's not always that, many retailers, won't stand for the kind of really bargain basement recipes actually. But I think that differentiation is really important, because your taste is actually one of your distinctive brand assets. And for a lot of brands, that taste or that performance, if you just make something like a washing liquid, actually, it's not necessarily a case of better, but you have to be you as a brand. And I think that's where it comes back to talking to shoppers and consumers, because if you know what the one most important thing is about your brand that you need to keep, you won't mess with that. And then you can mess with some of the things that are maybe less important.
And is that a point though? So you talked about selfish marketing, but also selfish businesses. And clearly we're seeing people like BP with record profits, but even Tesco's recorded record profits. So it's supposed to be every little helps. Heinz have obviously ramped up the cost of baked beans because of cost of goods. But then what they're never clear about is how much profit they're taking off the top. Is it not a time now to say, look, as a business, to be sustainable and to really give back, we should probably accept a smaller profit margin and let consumers know that we're taking less because we want to give back? Or
I think that could have a really good impact. Clearly, we're not sitting there and looking at their P&L. We don't know. BP, we have a damn good suspicion of what's going on. But it's absolutely, I think, being transparent and also supporting people. And this is where you come to almost the flip side of kind of, what is generous? What does generous marketing look like? If you look at someone like John Lewis, who is making sure all their staff have a hot meal every day during the cost of living crisis, they're getting an extra money to help them with their energy bills. They are investing in caring. Yes, there's some kind of PR around that, but equally, how much better is their customer service going to be than some of their competitors who have maybe got people on 0 hours contracts who don't really care, who kind of, so that investment for the future, I think, is really important. And actually it doesn't have to cost a huge amount of money. And thinking about ways you can be generous without necessarily pumping loads of cash, you know, back into product, back into marketing. I think is where companies can win at the moment, because basically we've all got to raise our game, haven't we?
And interesting thing for me is obviously there's always that kind of old adage, in times of recession, marketing budgets get pulled. I would expect currently for you to be really busy, because businesses will be coming back to you and saying, Isabel, I really need to re-understand the mindset of my consumer. I need to understand the insight. I need you to do research. Are you seeing that from brands, that they're coming to you and going, we quickly need to sense check how our people are feeling, or are they not even focused on?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm seeing it all the time, which is great, because things are changing so fast at the moment. You know, I think probably the 10 years up to 2020, looking back, very little changed. You know, we were really lucky. It was almost boring. The last 2 years, stuff is moving so fast. And actually what's important to people may be very different now in terms of a product. It may not be. You know, if you're working in snacking, tasting like you used to taste actually may be more important to people. Like I saw some, I cannot remember where it was. I saw something about Freddos recently. The mum gossip network has hooked onto the fact that Freddos, because of where they're made, taste more like the Cadbury we had when we were kids than maybe the Mondelez Cadbury chocolate brands we've got now.
Yeah.
And suddenly everyone was going, oh my goodness, you know, I'm going to start eating Freddos again. What's that all about? But that's going back to, that's more important now, because people want that comfort. They want that kind of, so yes, absolutely. There are also things that you can do and should be doing without necessarily commissioning a massive research project. No, I think one really useful thing to do, take your customer service teams out for a drink. Find out what they've stopped escalating. What have they stopped telling you about because they hear about it day in, day out, and nobody's doing anything about it? Because that is a danger point. You know,
I think that's fascinating, actually, because selfish marketing actually is something that's going to stick with me. I never thought of the concept actually of just calling it selfish marketing. And what you're talking about that's fascinating is to kind of say marketing should probably be spending a hell of a lot of time with customer services and going, before we talk about what's great about us, we should be fixing and communicating where the tension and the friction lies, right?
And getting that visibility, because often marketing teams will kind of have this niggle that comes up every so often that, oh yeah, we've got a few complaints about this. Nobody ever does anything about it because you've got, you know, other things screaming at you. Actually, where you're layering cost cutting on top of cost cutting, potentially, that is where things are risking. And also think about, you know, this is slightly different tech, but where people are spending marketing budget, how can you be generous in how you do that? Okay, so
I am going to say that has ended on the most perfect note. Actually, I say it every time. I could talk about this forever, but it does have to be short form content. I want to thank you so much for coming on the show. I think that was a fascinating insight into, hopefully people reach out and go, there's so much more I could learn from Isabel about actually just looking back through the lens of what was great about us, how we get to the core of our customer service problems. So thank you very much. I think episode 6 has been possibly my favorite. Don't tell the other 5, but really appreciate it. Thank you.
Oh, thanks, Brett.